Do you hear me? $1 trillion. My colleague Dave Anderson talked about $500 billion this year. That was yesterday. We need to talk about tomorrow. That's what SAMI is all about. It's about tomorrow, connect, collaborate, innovate, grow, and prosper. And how tomorrow will happen. $1 trillion, I think all we need is a 7 to 8% CAGR for the next 10 years. It'll be $1 trillion by 2030, and sooner, maybe sooner. And that's what the focus is all about. The new era of artificial intelligence, AI. I think we hear AI all around today, this week. And now Applied Materials is having a big symposium on that later today. But the next speaker, John Kelly, let me invite him here and say a few more words. John, come on in, please. Is there anybody in the audience who doesn't know John Kelly? If not, please meet me after this session. I'll give you a personal introduction, and we'll get you his autographs too. John, I don't think you need any introduction. Everybody knows you. People are lined up for this presentation. But I want to say a few more things. People don't know a lot about you. They know John Kelly III. I can stay here probably all day, talk about John Kelly. The talking points I had were like 10 pages, but then I brought one cheat sheet to make sure that I say the right things. I mean, John has been involved with 2 focused investments within IBM. One investment is to really grow the business. That's related to IBM Watson and cloud platform, Watson Health, Watson Internet of Things, Watson customer engagements, and non-Watson like IBM Security, IBM Research, and IBM Intellectual Property Team, and many others. Now, non-Watson, I think there are many other things they probably will be named after Kelly, maybe in a couple of years after he retires, if he retires. But the second investment is more about growing the world, helping the world, instead of growing the business. Setting up 12 labs around the world, and especially the recently 3 or 4 labs in Africa, South America, Australia, where he has brought 3,000 plus scientists and in about 10 laboratories or 12 laboratories around the world. This is really helping the world to grow, world to learn about science, world to learn about innovation, and develop. I think the other thing which I want to just remind, which I personally have a lot of experience working with John for many years, the Joint Technology Development Alliance with the IBM, many companies like ST, Global Foundries, Samsung, and that is going on, still going on. I think people don't give him credit for what he has done. If he did not do that, some of the companies would have gone out of business. I think there's no better way to say it. So John, thanks a lot. You've been doing a great job. And now the floor is yours to tell us how we get to 1 trillion by next 10 years or 5 years.
OK.
Thank you.
OK, thank you. Thank you, Ajit. And good morning. It's a pleasure to see so many of my friends here today, and hopefully I'll get to meet many of you again. As Ajit was kind enough not to mention, he said, I've been in the industry a long time, nearly 4 decades. And I see lots of people in the audience that probably are sort of the same age, roughly, and have been around a long time. And I can tell you, having been in this industry for 4 decades, we have never been at a more exciting point than we are today. And that says a lot, because I was around in the early days of Moore's Law, and I was around for many of the inventions that allowed us to continue that. But something is happening, and I will argue eventually 2 things are happening that are incredibly exciting and are not only going to change our industry, but to sort of segue back to Ajit's comments, are truly going to change the world. And I hope that the time I'm done in here, in the next 25 minutes or so, you'll believe the same thing. And it's all around artificial intelligence. I love the beyond smarter, because beyond smart to me is artificial intelligence. It's systems that aren't just analytical machines. It's systems that learn at scale and really do reason over enormous amounts of information to give us insights as humans that we would not otherwise have. And that has profound implications. So let me sort of step back for a moment and just put it in historical perspective. And this is one of the things you sort of do when you're with IBM, because IBM's 108 years old now, so we sort of look at things. We've been through the whole history of information technology. The first era of computing was all around mechanical tabulating devices. And those things were wonderful machines, and they sort of put computing if you will, on the map. And the technologies that did that were mechanical computing, vacuum tubes, and through all of those eras, companies like IBM built mechanical switches, built our own vacuum tubes, and it was a great introduction, if you will, to machines doing work for humans. The second era of computing is what I refer to as the programmable era of computing. And this is the era that there may be a few people a little bit older than me here, but this is the era of computing that we all have grown up in. And fundamentally, what we have done throughout this whole era of computing, through software programming, is to take human processes and knowledge and make the machine do what we tell it to do through programming. There were great inventions that allowed us to do that. Memory densities in the 50s reached a point where we could put the programs in the system as opposed to having to manually put punch cards in continually. And that era of computing is really what has powered us through the past 50, 60 years, and of course Moore's Law underneath that. It's been an incredible time. I mean, I joined IBM in the middle of that in 1980, and we were trying to stack two 16 kilobit DRAMs to get a 32-bit stack. And we were trying to cram 1,000 transistors into a microprocessor, today of which has 15 billion transistors. So it's been a heck of a ride in that second era. What's really exciting is that we are now entering, I think, a third era of computing. Cognitive, artificial intelligence, call it what you like. This is an era of computing which is at a scale and will have an impact that will dwarf the last previous programmable era of computing in ways that will change all of our businesses, all of our industries, and all of our lives. It began in about 2011 with early prototypes of thinking machines, if you will, systems like Watson, and it has exploded. And this era will not be just the latest sort of cute gadget coming and going. This will be another 50, 60, or more years of technology breakthrough innovation that will change the world. And I would argue this is the era that's going to power our semiconductor industry forward. And the number of opportunities is enormous. Now, let me try a different angle to convince you that this is important. We all know exponentials. We all know Moore's Law. We've lived with it. We've driven it for decades. Transistor count, performance doubles every 12 to 18 months. We all know that. Think about the power of that exponential curve. I don't know about you, but other than science fiction movies, back in the 80s and 90s, I had very little concept of what we were going to be able to pack into our mobile devices, our smart devices. Fast forward to the largest supercomputers in the world, which I'll speak to in a minute, and what those computers are capable of doing today. And yes, economics are stressing this, the physics are getting more difficult, but it still is an exponential. And in an exponential curve, companies that lead exponentials win. Companies that don't lead, even try to quickly follow, fail on exponential curves. And our industry is littered with examples of that. A second exponential curve is one that we sort of know as the network effect. It's really Metcalfe's law, which says the value of a network increases as the square of the number of connected devices to the network. The square of the number of connected devices. That was the source of the internet. That's what really made the internet valuable versus just a bunch of pipes. Because now the nodes on the network provided value. We've seen companies in social media explode because of that. Search engine companies have exploded due to that. Commerce in the internet has exploded because of the value of this square exponential law. And there's no end to this as we add devices, such as medical connected devices and Internet of Things devices to this. So that law has got power going forward. Second exponential. I believe that a third exponential is now upon us. The core of this exponential, and it was referenced earlier, I think it was by Dave, that data is doubling every 12 to 18 months. In fact, in some industries like healthcare, data is doubling every 6 months. That's why 90% of the world's data was created in the last 12 months. But that data is useless if we don't have the systems to take advantage of that. Now, we in IBM realized several years ago that our computers are lousy at dealing with that large unstructured data, and frankly, there aren't enough programmers in the world to deal with that explosion of data to extract value from it. The only way forward on that is through the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence to extract insights from that data. Now, the path to artificial intelligence has been a bumpy one, I'll be the first to admit. It goes back to the early 50s when one of our researchers, actually in our lab, tried to teach one of our early System 600 machines to play checkers. Fast forward to 1997, we taught a machine called Deep Blue to beat Garry Kasparov in chess. First time a computer system had ever beaten a grandmaster. Fast forward to the infamous Watson Jeopardy beating two humans in open domain, natural language, question and answering. Fast forward, and I'll show you in a minute, we have now taken that technology and applied it to areas like healthcare to transform the healthcare system. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, we demonstrated a system which we affectionately call the Watson Debater, which not only can answer questions, but can listen to a person's argument on something, reason and counter-argue in full natural language against that position in a full dialogue continuously. And in that demonstration, we basically tied a champion and won in another. So systems are now not just answering questions, they're not just smart microphones on your home desktop. These are systems that are starting to reason, and that has profound implications, profound implications. Now, why now? The now because data is, as I said, exploding. Everything is digitized. We heard the numbers on tweets, images, you name it, IoT. Everything is digitized, but it's a mess of data. So we can no longer structure it in our nice relational databases. We need machines that can reason over unstructured data. Second, we have enormous elastic compute power in clouds. Artificial intelligence is very compute intensive, particularly with the technologies we have on the table today. And then thirdly, we've made advances and continue to make advances in artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning algorithms, which are stunning, just stunning. And we are now able to learn actually over smaller and smaller amounts of data and translate that learning from one domain to another, to another, to another, and start to get scale of learning. So now's the time when this exponential is going to really explode. So you hear a lot about AI and machine learning, and let me sort of help calibrate you, at least from my perspective. Where are we on this journey? Much of what you've seen and heard about up to today is something I refer to as narrow artificial intelligence. So this is take a machine, teach it how to understand images, recognize cats, defects, you name it, or take natural language and say, okay, order me a pizza, order me a this, you know, blah, blah, blah. That's very narrow. Fairly easy to train a machine to do that. On the other extreme, and that's the state of the art for most of what people are talking about in AI. On the other extreme, in the research areas, we and many others are working around something called general artificial intelligence, which simply put is the magic box that knows everything, or at least knows as much as we possibly can know. That is a ways away. There's a lot of complications in doing what we do as humans in a general intelligence computing system. But whenever that is, whether that's 20 years, 30 years, 40 years away, there's a heck of a lot that can be done in between now and then. In fact, all of the action, all of the opportunity is over the next couple of decades as we apply artificial intelligence systems to every industry in the world, not just to help us make decisions better, but to transform those industries. Now, how big is that opportunity? We have estimated that on top of the existing $1.5 to $2 trillion information technology industry, there's another $2 trillion of decision support opportunity for artificial intelligence. Now, I don't know how much of that $2 trillion will make its way down into the semiconductor industry, but I think by the time I'm done, you'll be convinced that the semiconductor industry plays a critical role in tapping that $2 trillion opportunity. And in fact, when we look across industries, literally every industry in the world, whether it's industrial products, financial services, retail, every industry in the world is going to be impacted and transformed by this. It's very seldom that technologies come along that are going to impact every industry in the world and eventually every decision made in every industry in the world. So it's an enormous economic opportunity. We see it across the world in every industry, whether it's healthcare imaging or genomic research or genomic medicine or oil and gas exploration, optimization, worker safety, autonomous cars, artificial intelligence on top of blockchains controlling the world's shipping lanes. Every single industry now is introducing artificial intelligence into their decision-making processes. And we're just at the very beginning of this occurring. And we see every company now moving forward with AI plans. So, enormous opportunity. Let me just take one use case, which I think will sort of give you a sense for what's going on in an industry. So I chose healthcare. I chose one disease, cancer, oncology. And I want to just give you a quick snapshot of where can artificial intelligence help in cancer with patients and with doctors. The first part of cancer, of course, is early detection. The sooner you detect it, the better off you are. Artificial intelligence systems now are reaching and surpassing the accuracy of radiologists in many cases. We, in particular, are working on breast cancer and early detection of cancer and determining what is tumor, what is normal tissue at rates and paces that humans cannot achieve. So early detection. Second is, once you know that cancer has occurred, what do you do? Well, there are protocols around the world. There are different choices that institutions and physicians make. But the amount of information that's being generated on the outcomes of those treatments surpasses what any human being can possibly keep up with. So we created a version of our artificial intelligence system which was trained by Memorial Sloan Kettering, which now can deliver for 16 cancers, assist doctors globally in the diagnosis and treatment recommendations for that patient. Just in the time I'm speaking here, over 200 new cancer patients and their doctors will tap that artificial intelligence machine to ensure that the right decision is being made for that patient. The next step, of course, in cancer is it reoccurs. It comes back. And it comes back because whatever we did in the previous stage, we did not stop all the mutations. We have a program with the Broad Institute up in Boston, which is Harvard and MIT, to basically look at the root causes of cancer recurrence. This is a problem which is a huge data problem around the genomics of mutation, but it's a perfect problem for artificial intelligence. That's a problem we think we can solve. Talking about big problems from the previous speaker. And then finally, clinical trials. If all else fails, now you want to get into a clinical trial. There are thousands and thousands of clinical trials. In most institutions, 1 or 2% of patients have access to clinical trials because it takes too long to match your cancer to all the clinical trials. A version of Watson does this in 3 minutes. And now at places like Mayo Clinic, every woman with breast cancer has an opportunity to enter a clinical trial because that machine can do that match in minutes. So just think about that case transforming oncology and healthcare. And that's just one example of one industry. Now, let's then dive down into the technology. So now hopefully you're convinced that this is an enormous opportunity. Everything's going to be transformed. So what is required now to drive that third exponential curve that I showed you? It's this stack. We have to have the compute in the broadest sense, we have to have the algorithms in the network, and we have to have the data to train these systems. That requires an end-to-end view of these systems, from all the great materials work that Ohm and others spoke about, all the way up through the stack, through the algorithms and the data. And in some cases, the data you use to train these self-learning systems is more important than many of the things in the middle of the stack. Because initially, these systems have no intelligence until they're fed information and start to learn over that information. So that's the stack that we, as an industry, as partners, need to drive to realize that exponential curve that I talked about. Now, where are we today, and where are we going then in building these artificial intelligence systems? So this is, this may seem like a lot of the similar components to traditional programming computers, but the way these components interoperate and the technologies we'll need in each of these going forward are dramatically different than what we use today. So the CPU, of course, will constantly play a major role as not only the traffic cop for these AI systems, but handling massive amounts of data and making sure that the right places in the system are doing it. And in fact, many of the AI processes will be performed inside those CPUs. Memory, because it's big data, the faster that memory is and the closer that memory is to those CPUs and the accelerators on the right, the faster the system. And then the networking between the CPUs, the memory, and various forms of AI accelerators is absolutely critical. And so optimizing this whole spectrum inside a system is what determines the difference between an okay AI system and one that knocks your socks off. So in our case, we went in deep into our power Unix processors. And not only did multi-core and multi-level memory, but very special accelerators on the CPU for AI, very special interfaces out through things like NVLink, so that we can use those accelerators in a coherent way with the memory, and we can innovate around that CPU system. The result of that is this. This is today the largest supercomputer in the world, the Summit system. 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was down at Oak Ridge National Laboratory delivering this system to the Department of Energy. It's #1 in the world. It's capable of 200 petaflops of raw calculating speed. That's 200 billion calculations 1,000,000 times a second. It's also the largest artificial intelligence system in the world. Between those Power9 processors and NVIDIA accelerators and special memory systems we built into it, this is not only the biggest computer in the world, this is the smartest computer in the world. The problem and the challenge for all of us is that that system consumes 13 megawatts of power. 13 megawatts of power. And it's about, if this room was flat, it's about the size of this room. By the way, it's an engineering marvel to get 13 megawatts into a space that tight and then get the heat out. But that's another whole presentation. But that system, if you want to see the future of artificial intelligence and computing, that is the place to look. And we are on a path in a couple of years to build a system that's 5 to 6 times bigger than that and faster and orders of magnitude smarter. So we have to do something different. We can't keep pouring 13 megawatts into these systems. So we started years ago looking at different kinds of devices, synaptic devices, analog devices, devices that more mimic the way our 20-watt light bulbs work between our ears. And there are many, many techniques that can be used in materials and structures and devices to lower that power consumption. And people are waking up to that. And this thrills me as a veteran of this industry, that we have found another place where innovation can explode in artificial accelerator chips in these open ecosystems. And this, I think, is going to be a major next wave of innovation in our semiconductor industry, because we cannot keep doing 13 megawatts of power. Now, for things like deep learning, the performance improvement per watt has been improving pretty nicely, 2.5x per year on a compound rate. That's pretty good. The problem is we can see that curve plateauing, just the way we saw frequency plateau in CPUs. So the question is, can we extend beyond that current position? Can we extend beyond the GPUs and the more traditional accelerators we use today by reduced precision, by things like more analog, or improving analog circuits so that we can more mimic this kind of device? The answer is yes, we can. So how does this then come together if you take this and you look back to what I said on that supercomputer? If you ever want to see the future of computing, look at supercomputing, because that is the Formula One of computing. And I like to look back and say, well, you know, up till today, or up until this year, there were a whole bunch of computers that were in a league of their own, you know, high-performance numerical calculators that were the traditional high-performance computing market. Meanwhile, we've been doing commercial, and meanwhile, we've been doing artificial intelligence systems. But those systems, for the first time, came together in that summit system. I predict that you will probably never see another traditional supercomputer or just a traditional commercial computer. You will see more and more AI entering into those systems. And these things will come together and blend in the future. And that will be the future roadmap for computing. Now, I want to leave you with one last thought. So, great opportunity, novel materials, third exponential, AI. There's a fourth exponential coming, which will dwarf all of the previous ones. And it has to do with quantum computing. Now, you probably know a little bit about this. Some of you may know a lot about it. This, beyond AI, this may be the most important thing I've ever seen in my career or life. So quantum computing is a complete game changer. So what is different about it? We all know how our traditional computers work. Lots of ones and zeros. The ones and zeros come from our transistors. We put them together in logical ways. Bang, we make a computer. But that computer with billions of transistors can only have one compute state at one point in time. What that means is those computers can only scale proportional to the numbers of ones and zeros and transistors. So we're limited by that computer only having one state at one point in time. So is there a way to have a computer that has many, many more than one state at one point in time? And the answer is yes. And that's what quantum computing is all about. Instead of transistors, we have qubits. Instead of packing high densities together, it's not about necessarily how many you have. More is better, and I'll say a little bit about that in a minute, but it's how good are they, how cold are they, and how much alike are they. So we basically build qubits, we put them very close together, we take them down to near absolute zero, millikelvin, and all of a sudden, these things are totally different. They're no longer ones and zeros, as we know today, in bits. They are qubits, which are superpositions that can be multiple states of ones and zeros simultaneously. Simultaneously. And that is not only a superposition, but they entangle with each other in terms of their energy states. And between those two phenomenon, the performance of that computer now goes as a new exponential, 2 to n, where n is the number of qubits. So that's the science behind it. What does that mean? What that means is around between 50 and 100 qubits, and to calibrate you, IBM has stood up and is accessible on our cloud, a 20-qubit quantum computer. We've announced we have a 50-qubit quantum computer functional in our labs. Someplace between 50 and 100 qubits, that quantum computer will do certain computations in seconds, and computations computations that the largest computers, traditional computers in the world today, will never be able to do. So this is an enormous step. This is another way to look at it, and this will sort of blow your mind. All of Moore's law for the past 60 years, all of that performance improvement, those orders of magnitude, will be exceeded in one step to a 2-scale quantum computer, in the first commercial step of a quantum computer. So this is a game changer. Think about putting artificial intelligence on a quantum computer and going after the world's largest problems, whether it's healthcare, climate change, you name it. That combination of quantum computing and artificial intelligence is going to change our world in ways that we can't even conceive of sitting here today. We've opened up a network of partners to make quantum computing now a new standard in computing, to advance the state, to advance education, to advance programming languages and the infrastructure around quantum computing, because this is going to take an effort, a massive effort in the industry. So I end sort of where I started. Don't think of artificial intelligence or quantum computing or these sorts of things that you hear and read about as just another thing. What's happening right now is as or more fundamental a change than the very origins of integrated circuits and programming languages back in the early IBM System 360 days. We are at the very beginning of a new era of computing that not only will drive our semiconductor and IT industries, but will change every industry in the world and will thus change all of our lives going forward. I thank you for being part of this industry for nearly 4 decades, and as I often say, I really wish I was starting my career and my opportunity now versus on the back end of this, because the next decade or two are going to be incredibly exciting, and this industry is right at the heart and soul of what's going to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. It's always an honor to have you here at SemiCon West. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom today with us and looking at a glimpse of what's headed and the role artificial intelligence will play and the new quantum computing era that we're entering.